I've been thinking a lot lately about what happens after we leave this world. It's not something I usually talk about publicly, but an experience I had last year changed my perspective in ways I never expected. Leave a comment saying, Faith, if you want to hear about the moment that made me reconsider what might wait for us beyond this life. Most people know me for my companies and technology. What they don't know is how a personal experience opened my mind to something many of you have believed all along. My grandmother passed away at the age of 94. We had always been close despite our different views on life. She was a woman of deep faith who found comfort in her beliefs and attended church every Sunday until her health no longer permitted it. I, on the other hand, had always approached life from a more scientific perspective. I believed in what I could measure, test, and prove. When I was a child, she would tell me stories about heaven, about seeing loved ones again, about a peace beyond understanding. I would listen, fascinated by her certainty, though not sharing it. As I grew older and became more focused on technology and business, these conversations happened less frequently, but whenever we did talk, she never wavered in her beliefs. In her final months, I visited her as often as I could. She lived in a small house filled with memories, photographs covering every wall, handmade quilts draped over furniture, the scent of lilacs always present from the bushes she carefully tended in her garden. Even as her body weakened, her mind remained sharp, her faith unshaken. During one of my last visits, she took my hand and said, Elon, you've never believed what happens after we leave this world. That's okay, but promise me you'll keep an open mind. Some things can't be measured with your instruments. I promised her I would, though honestly, I wasn't sure what keeping an open mind meant in this context. To me, death had always seemed like the end of consciousness, the final shutdown of the complex electrical system that is our brain, nothing more. She passed away peacefully on a Saturday morning in April. The family gathered, shared memories, made arrangements. I handled everything with the calm efficiency that has served me well in business. Grief was there, of course, but I processed it like any other emotion, acknowledging it, working through it methodically. 3 nights after her funeral, I was alone in my home office late in the evening. Everyone else had gone to bed. I found myself looking through old family photos, including many of my grandmother from throughout her life, young and vibrant in the 1970s, holding me as a baby, standing proudly at my college graduation. It was around midnight when something strange happened. The room suddenly filled with the scent of lilacs, my grandmother's favorite flower. It was so strong and so sudden that I actually got up to look around, thinking someone might have brought flowers into the room. But there were no flowers, no air fresheners, the windows were closed, nothing that could explain the scent. As I stood there puzzled, I felt a gentle warmth surround me, not a change in the room's temperature, something different. It felt like someone had placed a warm blanket around my shoulders. And in that moment, I had an overwhelming sense that my grandmother was there letting me know she was okay. Now, I've always been a person who looks for logical explanations. My first thought was that grief was playing tricks on my mind. That seemed the most reasonable answer. Perhaps my brain was recreating sensory experiences associated with my grandmother as part of the grieving process. This made sense to me and I decided that's all it was. But then something else happened. My phone, which was on the desk, suddenly lit up. When I looked over, it was displaying a photo of my grandmother and me from 20 years ago. A photo I hadn't looked at in years, and that had been buried deep in my photo library. No notifications. No apps open, just her smiling face appearing on the screen. I checked the phone, thinking perhaps I had accidentally touched something to bring up the photo, but I hadn't been near the phone. It had been sitting untouched on the desk. I dismissed it as some sort of glitch. Phones do strange things sometimes. The scent of lilacs, perhaps a neighbor's flowers drifting in somehow, the feeling of warmth, just emotion and imagination. I went to bed that night thinking no more of it, just coincidences and the tricks an emotional mind can play. Then came the dream. 3 nights after her passing, I dreamt of my grandmother with incredible clarity, but it didn't feel like a normal dream. It felt like a visit. In this dream, we were sitting in her garden among the lilacs. She looked younger, healthier, but unmistakably herself. She spoke to me with the same gentle voice I'd known all my life. But there was a new quality to it, a sense of peace and certainty I hadn't heard before. I wanted to let you know that I'm fine, she said, better than fine, actually. It's beautiful here, Elon, more beautiful than I ever told you. I asked her where here was, but she just smiled. That's not important right now, she said. What's important is that, this isn't the end. The love we share doesn't stop, it continues. Then she told me things I couldn't possibly have known. Details about a conversation she had with my mother the day before she passed when I wasn't in the room. Specific words that were said about an old family disagreement that had finally been resolved. Words my mother later confirmed were exactly right. She also mentioned where she had hidden her favorite recipe book, something we had been looking for but couldn't find. Look behind the painting in the hallway, she said in the dream, the one of the mountain lake. I put it there years ago and forgot to tell anyone. I woke up from this dream with perfect clarity, remembering every detail. Unlike normal dreams that fade quickly upon waking, this one stayed vivid in my mind. Later that day, I called my mother and asked about the conversation with my grandmother. I was careful not to lead her or mention what I'd heard in the dream. When she confirmed the exact words and the resolution of the old family matter, I felt a chill run down my spine. Then I asked about the recipe book. No one knew where it was, she confirmed. So I suggested looking behind the painting in the hallway, the one of the mountain lake. My mother was surprised at the suggestion but agreed to look. She called me back an hour later, her voice shaking with emotion. The recipe book had been there exactly where my grandmother had said in my dream. It had been hidden behind that painting. For years, and none of us had any idea. I'm an engineer. I build rockets and electric cars. I work with data and physics and equations that explain how the world works. And for weeks, I tried to find logical explanations for these experiences. Maybe I had overheard the conversation between my mother and grandmother and forgotten it. Maybe someone had mentioned the hiding place for the recipe book and it had lodged in my subconscious. Maybe the phone glitch and the scent of lilacs were just coincidences that my grief-stricken mind had connected into a meaningful pattern. These explanations seemed reasonable, logical, much more likely than the alternative. That somehow some part of my grandmother continued to exist and had found a way to communicate with me. But then more things began to happen. Small things, but meaningful ones that seemed to defy coincidence. A month after her passing, I was facing a particularly difficult decision with one of my companies. That night, I dreamt of my grandmother again. She didn't mention the decision directly, but she quoted a piece of advice she had given me when I was starting my first business. When you're not sure which path to take, ask which one you'll regret not taking when you're my age. The next morning, I made the decision that was riskier, but that I knew I would regret not pursuing. It turned out to be exactly the right choice, though there was no way to know that at the time, on what would have been her birthday. I was driving home late at night. I turned on the radio and it was playing her favorite song, one I hadn't heard in years. As the music played, the car filled with the scent of lilacs again. During a difficult launch day, when it seemed like everything was going wrong, I found myself alone in my office for a moment, stressed and unsure what to do next. I felt that same warm feeling I'd experienced the night after her funeral, and somehow I knew which technical approach would solve the problem we were facing, an approach no one on the team had considered. Each of these experiences could be explained away individually. The dream about the business decision was just my subconscious mind recalling her advice. The song on the radio was just coincidence. The scent of lilacs, perhaps something in the car's ventilation system, the solution to the technical problem, just my own knowledge, finally clicking into place. But collectively, they began to form a pattern that was harder to dismiss. A pattern that suggested some form of connection, continuing beyond what I had always believed was the absolute end. I'm not saying I have scientific proof of an afterlife. I'm not claiming to know what happens when we die. I'm simply sharing that my experiences have opened me to possibilities I had previously dismissed. What I've come to believe is that perhaps the connection between souls doesn't end with death, that the bonds we form with those we love might continue in ways we don't fully understand. This realization has changed how I think about my life and work in profound ways. For decades, I focused on extending human life, whether through sustainable energy, making life multiplanetary, or developing new technologies. My goal has been to help humanity continue to prevent extinction, to give us more time in this physical existence, and that work remains important. But now I find myself wondering if I've been viewing life and death too narrowly. If physical existence is just one part of our journey rather than the entirety of it, that doesn't make this life less important. It might make it more important, but in different ways. This has made me think differently about how I live each day. If our connections continue beyond this life, then how we treat each other now matters even more than I thought. The kindness we show, the love we share, the forgiveness we offer, these might be the things that truly last. I've always valued solving big problems and creating useful products, but now I find myself equally focused on the quality of relationships I build, on being more patient with those around me, on making time for family and friends, even when work demands are intense. I think about my grandmother's life. She didn't build rockets or companies. She didn't accumulate wealth or fame, but she created a legacy of love that was so powerful it seemed to reach beyond death itself. Her influence continues not just through memories or the values she instilled, but perhaps in ways I'm only beginning to understand. I've also gained a new respect for the wisdom many of you have carried throughout your lives. The faith that many older generations have maintained, often despite hardship and loss, now seems less like simple belief and more like deep understanding. You've known something I'm only beginning to glimpse, that life might be bigger and more mysterious than our limited minds can comprehend. That the scientific instruments we've developed, impressive as they are, might not be capable of measuring everything that exists. This doesn't mean rejecting science. I still believe in the power of reason, evidence, and technological progress, but I've become more humble about the limits of our knowledge, more open to the possibility that there are aspects of reality we haven't yet figured out how to measure or understand. I think about the history of science, how each era believed it was close to a complete understanding of the universe, only to have new discoveries completely transform that understanding from a flat Earth to a spherical one, from an Earth-centered cosmos to our small planet orbiting an average star in an average galaxy, from Newtonian physics to relativity and quantum mechanics. Each revolution in our understanding didn't invalidate what came before, it expanded it, showing that reality was bigger and more complex than we had imagined. Perhaps our current understanding of consciousness and what happens when we die will undergo a similar expansion. I don't know exactly what awaits us after this life, but I'm no longer certain that death is the end of our story, and that possibility has made me more thoughtful about how I write the chapters of my life right now. If we continue in some form, if the connections we make endure, then shouldn't we focus more on love and less on material success? Shouldn't we work harder at healing relationships and offering forgiveness? Shouldn't we be kinder to each other on this journey we share? These are the questions I've been asking myself, not as a scientist or entrepreneur, but simply as a human being trying to understand what truly matters. I've begun making changes in my life based on these reflections. I've reached out to arrange family members to make amends. I've made more time for my children, being fully present rather than distracted by work. I've tried to be more patient and understanding with colleagues, recognizing that the way we treat each other might matter more than the products we create together, and I found myself returning to conversations I had with my grandmother years ago, conversations about faith, purpose, and what gives life meaning. I remember how she used to tell me that the most important thing was to love well. In the end, she would say that's all that matters, how well you loved. I didn't fully understand what she meant then, focused on building companies and technologies. I thought the most important thing was to solve problems and advance human capabilities. Love seemed nice, but secondary to progress. Now I wonder if she was right all along, if the connections we build with each other might be the primary purpose rather than a pleasant side effect of our existence. A few months after my grandmother passed, I visited her best friend, Martha, who was in her 90s. I wanted to hear stories about my grandmother that I might not know. Martha told me how my grandmother had been there for her through the loss of her husband, her battle with cancer, and countless smaller challenges over 60 years of friendship. She never missed an opportunity to show love, Martha told me. Even when she was busy raising children, working, taking care of her own parents, she always found time for others, always remembered what was important to them, always showed up when it mattered. As Martha spoke, I realized that was the legacy I wanted to leave as well, not just companies or technologies, but a pattern of love that might continue even beyond my lifetime. I share this story not to convince you of any particular belief, but to offer my experience as someone who has spent most of his life focused on the material world and who has now glimpsed the possibility of something more. Whatever you believe about what happens after this life, I think we can all agree on one thing: the connections we make with each other are precious. The love we share is what gives life its deepest meaning, and if that love continues even after death, as my experience with my grandmother suggests it might, then perhaps we should make sure we are creating connections in this life that are worth carrying into whatever comes next. I think about all of you who have lived long lives, who have loved deeply and lost much, who have maintained faith despite difficulties I can hardly imagine. There is wisdom in your experience that our youth-obsessed culture too often overlooks. You've witnessed how the patterns of love and connection play out across decades. You've seen how the small daily choices to be kind, patient, and forgiving create a life of meaning. You've experienced how the bonds between people can transcend distance, difficulty, and perhaps even death itself. I find myself wanting to learn from your wisdom now to understand better what you have known all along about what truly matters. My grandmother once told me, the trouble with being young is that you think you have forever. The blessing of being old is that you know how precious each day is. I'm beginning to understand what she meant. Each day is an opportunity to strengthen the connections that might last beyond our physical existence. I don't know what the future holds. I'll continue building companies and technologies that I hope will help humanity, but I'll do so with a broader perspective on what progress really means. Not just advancing our capabilities or extending our physical existence, but deepening our capacity for connection, meaning, and love. And I'll remain open to the mystery that my grandmother's passing revealed to me, that perhaps the story doesn't end when our physical bodies do, that perhaps the most important things we create in this life are the bonds of love that might transcend death itself. That perhaps the story doesn't end when our physical bodies do, that perhaps the most important things we create in this life are the bonds of love that might transcend death itself. I've come to see that this understanding doesn't diminish the importance of my work, it deepens it. When we build technologies that connect people, that enable communication across distances, that help families stay together despite physical separation, we're doing something profound. We're creating tools that strengthen those enduring bonds. Sometimes I wonder what my grandmother would think of today's world. Would she marvel at our achievements or worry about our divisions? I suspect she'd remind me that each innovation is only as valuable as its ability to serve our deeper human needs for connection, purpose, and love. In quiet moments, I still feel her presence, not in dramatic ways like those first experiences after her passing, but in subtle nudges toward compassion when I'm being too harsh, toward patience when I'm rushing decisions, toward presence when I'm distracted by the endless demands of work. We all carry those we've loved within us. Their wisdom becomes part of our own. Their love shapes how we love others. In this way, perhaps they do live on, not just in memory, but in the ongoing influence they have through us. Whatever awaits us beyond this life, I'm certain that how we live now matters deeply. The kindness we show, the forgiveness we offer, the love we share, these create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Share this with someone whose wisdom about life's deeper meanings you've come to appreciate. Subscribe if you believe that what truly matters in life goes beyond what we can see and touch. Have you ever had an experience that made you wonder if our connections continue after death?